Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. I'm your host. Stats Canada released some numbers about the second quarter GDP, and on the surface of it, it's going to make the Liberal Party try to convince you that the economy is turning around. And you can tell that by the way that the far left media is trying to say that now the Bank of Canada rate might come down. First of all, when the far left media is trying to tell you something, it's always wise to look in the other direction. These are the same people that told you printing money would not cause inflation. So I wouldn't trust them necessarily for my financial advice. Now, when they released the inflation rate last month, I told you that that number was artificial, that actual inflation month over month had increased. And you know, when you go to the grocery store, that things are more expensive. And I mentioned to you that it was all about consumer confidence. And this, as we can see, is still continuing, that they're trying to convince you of one thing while the other thing is absolutely 100% true. And the markers are there. They're obvious and plain to see. Before I get into it, I would encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. I also have memberships if you are looking to support the channel further. Statistics Canada released the numbers, the GDP numbers for the second quarter of 2024. Now, I will just start by saying they released it on a Friday of a long weekend. That should be a clue to you that they have something that they don't want people to look at. However, they're going to say, oh, it went higher. If you cherry pick some of the numbers, you'll get this impression that the GDP has grown and that as a result, the economy is reflective of that. And of course, we all know that that is artificial. We know that that's not actually the case. And in fact, it is a strong indicator that the economy is shrinking rapidly. Now, if Chrystia Freeland is going to try to come into the house and run around screaming, oh, GDP, 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 I swear, I have heard that person say GDP so often, it almost loses all meaning. Before I break it down for you, I'm just going to read a little bit of the report. Gross domestic product, income and expenditure, second quarter 2024. Was released on August 30th. Again, a Friday before a long weekend, the Labor Day weekend. Real gross domestic product increased 0.5% in the second quarter after rising 0.4% in the first quarter. Higher government final consumption expenditures, business investment in engineering structures and machinery and equipment, and household spending on services in the second quarter were moderated by declines in exports, residential construction, and household spending on goods. Now, this is important. Right? Those things, I will break them down. But this next line, which is right in the opening paragraph, on a per capita basis, the GDP fell 0.1% in the second quarter, the fifth consecutive quarterly decline. Why would they have two discrepancies, you may be asking yourself? Well, the real gross domestic product includes government spending. I'll get to that. Just let me break down some more of the report. Government spending rises on higher wages. They negotiated a bunch of contracts, remember? And now those wages are coming through. Government expenditures rose 1.5% in the second quarter as there were increases in compensation for employees. Think the CBC, big payout to them, which is an expense for government. Hours worked across all levels of government. I guess they had to work overtime so they could take the summer off. Purchases of goods and services in the federal as well as in the provincial and territorial governments also rebounded in the second quarter from a decline in the first quarter. What goods and services were they buying? Picnic baskets? More barbecues? What? Airplanes flying all over the place. Rented in hotel rooms so they could talk to everybody, or what do you call them? Conference rooms so they could talk to everybody. Getting the grass cut. Now, the other indication that the numbers are increasing are higher business investment in machinery, equipment, and engineering structures, which went up 6.5%. But that's not an indication that the economy is growing. That's just an indication that they're making improvements, which in turn could be written off as tax write-offs, right? So it's, again, an artificially inflated number, this 0.5%. What matters is there's two of them that are coming up. And when I told you that the GDP went down 0.1% and it's the fifth shrinkage in a row, that is all that matters. That is the indication that our economy is getting smaller. The idea that the government is spending more money is tax money. So it's your money. So all of the taxes that they're collecting, all of these enormous amounts of taxes, are actually only going to make their government bigger. They're not improving the roads. They're not improving anything. They are just simply coming in one hand and going out the other. It's like that first of the month time in every household where you get your pay in, but all of the bills are due on that day, so out it goes. Then you say, oh, look, I just spent $3,000. Of course you did, because it's the first of the month and all your bills are due. Household spending slows in the second quarter. Now, this is important. Okay, this is a factor that will indicate where we are going, right? Growth in household spending slowed by 0.2% in the second quarter after rising 0.9% in the first quarter. Higher expenditures for rental fees for housing, food, electricity led to the increase in the second quarter. Meanwhile, fewer purchases of new trucks, vans, sports utility, as well as reduced expenditures in Canadians abroad tempered overall growth. Population growth outpaced the increase in housing spending in the second quarter, and as a result, per capita household expenditures fell 0.4% after rising 0.3% in the first quarter. So people were spending stuff around January, February, March, and then because we now have a lot more people in the country, and your money's not going as far, and because inflation hasn't caused things to go higher, despite what they want you to believe, you're not spending as much money. And what's interesting is that in the first quarter, they cited trucks, vans, and everything as part of the major growth. I wonder how Mr. Guilbeault feels about people buying vehicles that are not electric. Weakening net trade as exports decline more than imports, that is really bad. It's a deficit of $8 billion. I don't know why we're bringing in $8 billion more than we're sending out, but it's possible that we're making it for the domestic market, which it's not a bad thing, right? To say that we're making things so that everything we make is being sold inside of Canada. That wouldn't be a big deal. Residential construction continues to decline, falling in 8 of the last 9 quarters. Housing investment was down 1.9% in the second quarter. 1.9% is a big number when we're talking about housing. The largest decline since the first quarter of 2023. The decrease in the second quarter of 2024 was driven by lower investment in new construction, which was down 1.6%. As work put in place for single-family dwellings and apartments fell, primarily in Ontario, renovations fell 2.6%. Ownership transfer cost, which represents a resale market, declined by 1.1%, led by less activity in Ontario. I wonder why. Capital sales tax. So really what that says is people are not buying houses. They're not building them, and nobody is buying them, and nobody is giving them to their children. People have just decided to hold their breath. Of course, the common person is going to hold their breath. I mean, the Liberal Party can convince you of a lot of things, but eventually the truth will dawn on you, right? It's like that spouse that you have that's always telling you, no, they weren't really flirting with that person. And then eventually you're like, no, man, I saw it with my own 2 eyes. Compensation of employees rises. Compensation of employees rose 1.6% in the second quarter after decreasing 1.5% in the first quarter. Growth in the second quarter was led by increased wages in healthcare, social assistance, educational services, financial, and insurance. Retroactive payments associated with arbitration decisions for members of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation and Elementary Teachers Federations of Ontario were a large contributor to the wage growth in educational services. Among all industries, wages and salaries in mining and oil extraction, which went up 5%, had the strongest growth in the second quarter. What the oil and gas going up 5% can be good and bad. I mean, they have a balance sheet, so they may very well be charging 5% more for their product. But those people are taking those wages and they're spending it. However, the fact that Ontario had to settle out for their teachers union is going to say, oh, look, that's more money going into the real GDP, but it's not actually stimulating the economy. It's money that's coming out, right? So that's why the real GDP looks like it's gone up 5%, because the federal government had to give money to the unions that they negotiated with. Ontario had to give money to the unions that they negotiated with. The real GDP, the actual GDP, right? The per capita GDP of people, right? Just the commoners, the 99% of us is small. It's shrunk. Nobody's buying stuff at the store. Nobody's buying investment in property, housing. Who can afford it? Jobs are shrinking. That's what really matters, because we're at this precipice right now that nobody wants to acknowledge because they're terrified that the consumer will stop spending. Household savings rate up on higher wages. Household savings rate reached 7.2% in the second quarter as gains in disposable income outpaced increases in normal consumption expenditure. Disposable income gains were mainly from wages and salaries, which of course will be reflected in the arbitration settlements of all of those teachers. They'll say, oh, those people got a raise and now they're saving more money. But I will tell you the truth, right? They don't want you to save any money. They want you to constantly be spending your money. All the money you save, that means that they have to have more cash on hand. That's the way the system works in Canada. So the more money you put in the bank, the more money they have to keep, which means it's less money that they can invest in, all of the things that they like to invest in, right? Apartment complexes, mines, who knows what it is. That's what a bank does, right? You give them your money to hold on to, keep safe, and they take that money and they put it into stuff, and then that stuff creates a profit, and then that profit comes back to them, and you still have your money at whatever interest your account is paying out at, unless of course it's a mutual fund, and then it's high risk, low risk, all that, and they keep the lion's share. That's what banks do. In Canada, however, we have a lot more regulation than in other parts of the country. So every time you put money in the bank, not only are you not spending it at the store, but they have to keep more cash on hand to ensure that the system doesn't collapse, like in 2008 in the United States of America. So what we are seeing by that is that people are not spending money. Growth in investment income slowed in the second quarter, rising to 2.8, mainly on higher investment interest received on dividends. At the same time, household property income payments comprised of mortgage and non-mortgage interest expenses rose at a faster pace, 5.7%. That means housing market has gone up 5.7%, which is coming right out of your bottom line. So if you got a raise of 6%, you shouldn't notice it. If you did not get a raise of 6%, then you are probably paying out more for rent than you have coming in. Compared with the first quarter, the Bank of Canada announced a cut to the policy interest rate at the beginning of June. See, why would they need to slide that in there? Because they're worried, right? They want you to have confidence in them. And I'm telling you, you should not be. Followed by a further cut in July. However, many mortgage borrowers are still facing relatively high renewal costs following the rate hikes that began in 2022. Higher income households tend to earn greater share of investment income than lower income houses, while lower income houses tend to have interest expenses that represent a greater share in their disposable income. And what that means is people that got money make money, people that don't. People that have money can save it, people that don't have money are spending it. What you need to remove from that is two things. They say that 7% of people the 7% of the money that's going out to the common person is being saved, which means it's not being spent on booze or food that's not junk food or streaming services, the date night, just the list of things that you would put your disposable income in. I mean, how many women out there right now have decided that they're going to wear less makeup, and how many men out there have decided that they're not going to shave, and these kinds of things add up and they ripple, right? Because now you don't have to spend money on razor blades, right? If you don't shave and things of that nature. I mean, I'm just using it as an example of all of the ways that the cost cutting starts to impact, because then that begins to ripple outward, and eventually it hits some of these larger corporations, and they say we didn't make as much money. Then the dividends don't get paid out as well. And it ripples and ripples and ripples, and then ultimately it gets really bad for the people at the top. What I want you to take away from this video is that the economy is not doing better. All you need to do is just keep track of the expenses that you see around you. Just keep track of how much stuff costs in the store and how much it used to cost last year or the year before. And understand that the housing market is still ready to pop because nobody's buying houses. And they said so as much. I know the people that did foolishly buy houses when the government was printing money, like they had their own private printing press, those people are about to come up against some hardcore shock and awe, which is going to put more housing stock back into the market because they're going to have to default on their loans. They're simply not going to have the money they need to allow the bank to extend their mortgage based on that increase of 4%. So that ripple is still yet to be felt. I think that if I remember right, it was supposed to be somewhere in the middle of 2026 that it was going to really come crashing down all around us, right? Because that would make sense, right? I think it was 2026, but it's starting to play out now, even in this report. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I could go on, and if you want me to explain it to you further, just leave comments. I will keep an eye on this for us, but I have let this one go on too long. It's not a simple subject. You have to realize that there's many nuances and ripples to it, and I want you to understand when you hear the Liberal Party screaming, "Oh, the GDP has gone up," that actually it's only gone up because the government is spending more of our money on things that don't improve the economy. And if the GDP was really going up, then you and I would have more things to spend our money on. We would be living a better caliber of life. But let's be honest. When you look around your life, your neighbors, your friends, your family, is that the impression that you get? Okay, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you all for listening. I'll talk to you next time.